Hello, I'm Terry Georgiou from the London Psychology Collective. Today we have with us Dr. Patricia Bonnici, and we'll be speaking about Friedrich Nietzsche and how some of his ideas can apply to everyday life. Welcome, Patricia.
Thank you, Terry.
So, would you like to start by telling us a bit about Nietzsche?
Okay, so Nietzsche was born in Germany in 1844. He's another one who almost became, almost studied theology. He went to university to study theology. He had quite a hard childhood where his father had died of some brain disease, and he died quite slowly and quite painfully. So Nietzsche is quite a young boy. He was about 4 at the time, watched his father die quite in a lot of pain, really. And soon after that, he also lost a brother. So yes, this is in the background of his mind, that life is quite painful. From a very young age, he realized this. Then he goes away to university. He studies theology for a term. He gives that up, and he quickly moves into studying languages. And then eventually, I guess, most of his time is dedicated to writing philosophical texts. He also was quite sickly himself, so by the age of about 30, he was partially invalid. He couldn't walk very well. He was in quite a lot of pain. We're not really sure what the cause of this was, but kind of speculation at this point in time is generally that he might have contracted syphilis as a young university student when he first went to university, and that this might have been neurosyphilis, and that's why he had lots of pain all over his body and why he became almost paralyzed by the end of his life. However, despite this, he was quite active. He liked trekking, like climbing mountains. So often in summer, this is what he'd do. He'd rent out a little room in a cottage, and he'd wake up quite early. He'd walk up the mountain. He'd come back. He'd write. And he thought that this was very important. This was part of his ideas as well of overcoming the body. So despite the limitations that his body had put on him and his health had put on him, he still carried on doing what he enjoyed doing. And he died in 1900, when he was still quite young, at 56. And again, it was due to a mental collapse in the streets. After he saw a horse being whipped, I believe. So he got quite upset by this. So he had quite an interesting and also painful life.
And so tell us about some of his main ideas or his important works.
Quite early on, he wrote a book which I think is still quite popular, Thus Spake Zarathustra. And it's quite an interesting book. I think it's one of the easier books to read. It's written sort of like a biblical text. Some people would say it's a parody of the Bible. And basically it's about a prophet that goes up to the mountain. And there he gets revelations. He learns more about himself and about life and what life means. And he wants to come down from the mountain, and he wants to go back into the town and tell people about all the discoveries that he's made to help them live better lives. This is the book where we talk about one of his main ideas, which is the Übermensch, which sometimes is translated into English as a superman. An overman would be sort of a literal translation of that, which is often quite a misunderstood term by Nietzsche. He wanted it to mean someone who had overcome himself, which was his idea of that's why he was the overman. He had overcome his limitations. He had found a new way of being himself, so to say. He had, Nietzsche would say something around transvalued all values, which for him would mean finding your own sense of morality, finding your own way of life, finding your own way to best live your life. And this was the Übermensch. He often associated this, for example, with creative people. So artist Goethe, for example, was his... He said that we never really had a proper Übermensch, but that different people had approached levels of Übermensch, and that Goethe, for example, would have been one of these people who really approached this idea of overcoming himself and living a life which was very authentic to him.
It's a very controversial topic, isn't it, this idea of the Übermensch, because I suppose people may be familiar with its adoption by anti-Semitic groups, and in the First and Second World War, the Nazis using the idea of the Superman, so people associating that with Nietzsche.
Yes, which is quite unfortunate. I mean, Nietzsche died, as we said, in 1900, so he didn't really have anything to do with that himself. Unfortunately, however, his sister was his successor, his literary executive, so she re-edited some of the books and put them together in slightly different ways, or left some text out. And she did promote some of these ideas to social nationalism. So in many ways, the Übermensch came to be identified almost with the German race. So it almost became a racial thing, that the German race was the Übermensch, and all the other races that they wanted to get rid of were therefore inferior to them. But I really don't think that that's what Nietzsche meant by it at all, because for Nietzsche, it wasn't about overcoming other people. It was very much about overcoming the self. It was very much about becoming unique, really. So if anything, belonging to a political party is all about following a master and doing what the party says you should be doing, while for him it was very much about finding your own way, that there is no objectivity out there, there's no one right path, we're all very different, and that's why we all have to go like the prophet up into the mountain and find what's right for us, and then we can come back down from the mountain. So there was no real point of following what someone told you should follow, or believing what someone told you should believe. He was very highly individualistic in that way.
So I suppose with regard to modern life and everyday life, I suppose that's one of his ideas which could be helpful for people, this idea of overcoming yourself. In a sense, I suppose, developing yourself, your ideas, and moving away from prescribed ways of being or common ways of being, and finding an individualist set of values or morals that might fit you.
Yeah, and I think he would link that to a sense of transcendence. Again, sort of like Kierkegaard, he believed in this living between two polarities, and he often said that we're a rope between animal and man, and that we have to try to find a balance between them. And the Übermensch was the person who managed to find this balance. So the Übermensch would have been an integrated person of mind, body, soul. And I guess that's also what we try to achieve nowadays, isn't it? We try to find the place where we do have balance, where we take care of ourselves, both in terms of mental health, and we go to the gym, and it is very much about trying to find the way that works for us.
That's interesting. I suppose if we put that into a modern context, the idea of mind, body and soul, and I suppose that's quite fashionable at the moment, probably with an Eastern slant to it, looking at ways of integrating ourselves or developing ourselves in all of those ways. Often we think of things like meditation or certain types of activity like yoga or something. But, he was already talking about the importance of the body, wasn't he? And how we're not just a mind, we're a whole, and soul, so we're a whole being.
Yeah, he was very much against the Cartesian split, which in general the existentialists all are against the Cartesian split. So very much this idea that, of course, body and mind interact, and we wouldn't have a mind if we didn't have a body, because where would the mind be? And that was what he was trying to really look at, of how they can all be integrated, and how we can overcome, in a sense, both integrate and also overcome the limitations that each of them might put on us. That, like, in many ways, Nietzsche's body let him down. He was very sick, he couldn't do many things, but he still persevered and kept going. And I think this as well can have a lot of meaning for people who might have suffered physical accidents and feel that now I'm very limited, and feel maybe very angry at the world for what has happened to them, but in a sense of really trying to overcome what limitations they might have, whether those are physical or spiritual or kind of mental health wise.
Yeah, I think there's great value in that. I mean, for people that have had or still have, ongoing illnesses and many things that may impede their functionality or living a life that they may see others living, and to feel that they're very unhappy about that they're limited. And nowadays I think people want everything, don't they? They want the perfect life, and the idea of happiness may be to have all of that. And so any limitation, anything missing, I think can cause great unhappiness.
Yeah, and I think this links to his idea where in Latin would be called amor fati, or loving your fate. And really this was a very important idea for Nietzsche, that no matter what you are given, in the sense of what life gives you or what happens to you, there is an acceptance of this, that this doesn't mean we only accept what has been given to us when it's good, when we're given money, when we're given health, when we're given great jobs and great opportunities, but that we accept everything that is given to us, and we do not wish for it to be otherwise. So it's not only accepting it and saying, well, this is the way I am, it would have been great if I was like this, but I'm not. But for him, it's also this idea that I would never want to change this, neither in the past, nor now, nor in all eternity. I would completely accept my fate as it is, and I would love my fate, which in many ways I think is a very stoic notion, again, of accepting the way life is, that life in many ways is absurd, and it doesn't have a meaning, things don't happen for a reason, and yes, it might seem very unfair what happens to us. It might seem very unfair that I was always so careful with my health. I always made sure to eat the right sort of food and to get enough exercise, and then suddenly I have cancer while somebody else drinks and eats the wrong sort of food and smokes and never exercises, and yet they seem to be really healthy. And Nietzsche would have said, kind of very matter-of-factly, well, what's your point? Why did you expect otherwise? Why did you think that you would be rewarded for what you were doing? That it doesn't necessarily follow, really, but you can still love your fate exactly the way that it is.
And tell us about this idea of the eternal recurrence, because I find this really interesting, and I'm not sure how well it fits in with Amor Fati. You'll be able to tell us better. But it's a very interesting concept, isn't it?
I really like his idea, and he writes it, I think, very passionately and in a way that is really not philosophical, so it's very easy, I think, to engage with. So he sets up this whole scene of someone's asleep in bed, and he's woken in the middle of the night by a demon who visits him, and the demon tells him to really imagine your whole life. Think back of everything that has ever happened to you in an exact order that has ever happened to you, and think that this is going to be repeated again and again and again in the exact same detail. So every little minute thing that ever happened to you in your life, and he says, including me and the moonbeams that you're in this room right now, and this spider which is in this room, are just going to happen again and again. And he asks him, what do you feel? What does that idea make you feel? Does it fill you with horror that you think I will live this life numerous, endless times? And really what Nietzsche wanted was, he really wanted philosophy to move people. So he wasn't writing philosophy in this, it's an academic thing, it stays on the shelf in the library and I can say that I've read this book. But it was pretty much that people would read that and they would be filled with horror sometimes, that, oh my God, I really don't want this life. I don't want to have to go through this again. It was terrible the first time round. Why would I want to do that 10 times? And if that's your feeling, then there's something about changing what you're living in your life and making it into a life where you would feel, yes, I'd be happy to live this life over and over again. I've dedicated myself to a cause which I felt was worthy, and it might have been really difficult, but I would do it again if I had to. And I think it's a very powerful image, and reading it, I think, is very moving. And sometimes I actually give it to my clients. I print out this little paragraph where he really describes this, and I ask my clients, so which bits of your life don't you want to live again? Which bits would you like to live again? And how are you going to change your life in such a way that there are many more bits that you would be happy to have to repeat until eternity, and there are less bits that you would never want to relive?
I think it's a wonderful motivator, to think of your life or your choices in a much deeper way, I suppose, not just as being fairly important now in this moment, but echoing across eternity. I suppose it puts them into a context, doesn't it? And I suppose it encourages someone to really make considered choices, or to highlight what's really important, perhaps.
Yeah, it's a much more thoughtful and committed way to being in the world, isn't it? Because this isn't just now, this isn't just the next 5 minutes or the next 1 year, but would I want to do this again? What implications does it have for the rest of my life? How is it going to change things for me? I think that is very moving idea, really, for people to really stop and engage with that. And I think in some ways, sort of Hollywood has picked up on this idea in slightly different ways. I don't know if you've watched quite the old film Groundhog Day, where he relives the same day until he learns his lesson. So for him, there was something to be learned. But again, his sense of despair of waking up again and realizing, oh my God, it's the same day again. I'm going to have to repeat everything I've done. And I think, that's precisely what Nietzsche is talking about, this sense of horror of when he wakes up to realize it's the same day until he finally learns the lesson that he needed to learn. And in some senses, that's what we're trying to do as well. If we can live a life that we always learn from, that somehow changes us, then we can create a life where we would be happy to have to relive it.
Yeah. I think that gives a great deal of food for thought. I think, for people to think about that in a modern context and to look at their lives and wonder whether it's now worth making the changes that they may be thinking about, and to really put things into perspective. I think that really could be very helpful for a lot of people. Yeah,
and I think Nietzsche has become very influential in sort of psychology through influencing Freud in many ways. He kind of preempted he developed some ideas which Freud picked up and then later developed. Nietzsche was quite interested in ideas like the drives, for example, things that drive us forward, that push us forward, which Freud sort of develops into ideas of the id and the unconscious. And Freud owned complete works by Nietzsche, and he owned 2 copies of them. So he was very much into Nietzsche's ideas. And really at the time, if you were an educated German, you would have known Nietzsche's work quite well, and you would have been quite familiar with a lot of what he wrote. So he was very much interested in the soul, or what we call soul or psyche, but very much it wasn't a philosophy of the mind, which was about some abstract concepts that we couldn't really understand, and where you wondered, well, what's the point of that? How is that going to change my life? But he was very much interested in a very practical philosophy that people could engage with and that would lead to a better life.
Yeah, because I've heard different commentators speak about Nietzsche and perhaps how qualified he may have been to be a philosopher. They question how qualified he may have been. He was a philologist, a study of languages, classical works, and then picked up philosophy, I suppose. But when you think of perhaps having an influence on Freud and modern psychology, or classical psychology, I suppose he's very well qualified in a sense to tell us something about ourselves, and these concepts, I think, through in the existentialist kind of arena seem to be really important ones, I think.
And I think, he's very qualified to talk about a hard life, having lived such a hard life. And I think, he very much lived his philosophy. He wasn't writing about amor fati, loved this hard existence, again, when he was very comfortable and he was very rich and he was very healthy, where you can go, oh yes, isn't it easy to love your existence when you have all the luxuries of life and you want for nothing? Who wouldn't love their existence? But for him to still say that he loves his existence, that he still feels that life is worth living, that what he does is worth doing, even if he was very ill, at the time he was quite ill, it was quite difficult for him to actually write, but he still insisted on doing it because he very much felt that he did love his existence. And it was a very important task for him to do. And I think sort of linked in with this is the interesting idea about giving and receiving things, that sometimes we see people in pain and we want to take things away from them, we want to take the pain away from them, which again Nietzsche felt wasn't a very helpful thing to do, that people needed to experience their pain, they needed to go through this journey because it would help them reach depth of feeling, which in a sense would open them up then so that they could feel a wider range of things, and that if we just jumped in and saved them, they wouldn't be able to reach this place. And maybe this is also why Nietzsche maybe loved his fate so much because he felt that all this suffering was really allowing him to understand human experience and to really engage with life and make him feel things very passionately and very deeply.
So to be able to engage more fully with life and feel more deeply, but also I suppose feeling positive feelings too, like joy, like a range of positive emotions too, opening up all of our experience, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think one of the Eastern poets, Rumi or something, had an idea around that the deeper that suffering digs into you, then the bigger is the bowl where happiness can fill. And I think this ties in very well with Nietzsche's idea that if we allow people to really go through suffering, not maybe on their own, as in we ignore them and we abandon them, but we don't try to take away their suffering, then they are open to very deep emotions, and those deep emotions can also be happiness and love and joy and compassion for other people. And I guess that's quite controversial in terms of therapy, isn't it? Because many people want to go to therapy so that the therapist precisely takes away the pain, because I don't want to feel it. And what is the therapist's job? Is the therapist's job to take away that pain as quickly and as efficiently as possible? Or is it to say, okay, I'll accompany you on the journey, I'll let you feel the pain, I'll let you see where it's coming from and what it's doing to you, and eventually you will find your own way out of it, but I'm not going to take the pain away because I believe that you can really learn something from this pain and get something from it.
I suppose that is a controversial point. I think different therapists will have different ideas about whether they, agree with that or not. But I think that, I like this concept of, I suppose, the therapist going alongside, being a companion, and I think most therapists would agree with that. A companion along the person's journey to experience alongside them what they're going through, not necessarily to as quickly as possible take away anything negative that's going on for them, but to help them find meaning, I suppose, which is perhaps a more satisfying and stronger position to be in at the end of the journey.
Yeah, and I think that's precisely it, that then they will have learnt these skills and they will take something forward into the next part of the journey, while if you save them very quickly from it, maybe they didn't have to experience pain for so long or so intensely, but what are they left with at the end of it? Are they prepared for the next part of the journey? Yeah,
have they built up resilience and the strength to manage different problems that may come up in the future, I suppose.
Yeah.
So I suppose there's something interesting there for therapists as well to think about, but also people, even helping each other, friends, going to a friend to support them in a difficult time, and to be able to really hear them and be alongside them, as opposed to trying to immediately take away or fix the problem without having fully heard what the problem is, I suppose.
Yes, it's the classic kind of scenario, isn't it, of the woman complaining about something, unhappy about something, and the man very quickly offering the solution is like, why don't you just do this? And kind of the woman always saying, I just wanted you to listen to it, I didn't ask you for an answer to it. And I think that is very much part of it, isn't it? That sometimes all we want to do is we want to talk, we want to express our anger, our sadness, and we just really want someone to listen. And when the time is right, we might find our own answers, or then we might actually ask people, listen, I have this problem, what do you think I should do? But until we really get to that place, there is really a place to stay with a person as they're complaining or angry or upset.
Or in hearing yourself express your problem to someone and reflecting upon it, that you start to find your own answers as well, not necessarily what the other person says, but having the opportunity to speak to them about it, I think is very enriching for the person speaking.
Yeah, and I guess that leads us back again to the idea of the Ubermensch, is that you have to find your own answer, that if the friend or the husband or the therapist gives you the answer ready-made and you just have to apply it, or they've actually solved the problem for you and there is no problem anymore, then you haven't found your own unique way of being in the world. You haven't found your own kind of transvaluing of what society has given you, and that would be why it would be quite important to just stay with someone and sort of walk beside them, but really letting them choose the path and letting them see where they want to go and how they want to solve something.
Well, once again, thank you very much, Patricia.
Very welcome.
Thanks.